All set.
Thank you so much, Megan. So welcome, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Charles de Vilmorin, and I am with Linked Senior. We are a resident engagement platform based in Washington, D.C. We have strong values. One of them is called Old People Are Cool, and it stems from the fact that we're not a fan of segregation based on age. We believe that everyone is cool, including our elders, including our residents. And then obviously the second aspect is activity is strong, which is why we are here. This is a platform that Link Senior initiated, and we work in partnership with Activity Connection, NAP, and NCAP. And the sole intention is to empower, acknowledge the amazing work of activity and life enrichment professionals, and obviously very much in the line of today's work, to educate. Just a few announcements more on the administrative side. We can earn up to 3 NAB, NCAP, NCTRC, and or NCC DPC credits. To earn the credits, you need to attend the full session, the 1 full session, or up to 3. And to get the CUs, please fill in the survey no later than Friday, at the end of the day, Friday, September 8th, so we can process these certificates and issue again up to 3 of these CUs. Please note that due to the large number of attendees, certificates will be sent out via email throughout next week from the 11th to the 15th. And if you have any questions, please send them at webinars@linkedsenior.com. As a reminder, this session is being recorded. So if you enjoy it, want to come back to it, it's going to be available on our website. But obviously, if you feel that other of your friends or colleague or anyone in your organization or beyond would benefit from them, just know that we're going to be listing them in a couple of days on our website. As a reminder, we're using Zoom. I think that everyone knows what Zoom is about now, but there are 2 ways to engage: the chat and the Q&A. Please use the chat as much as possible. If you're going to use it and you want the whole audience to benefit from your contribution, make sure you select everyone. And then if you want to have a question or a comment towards the panelists, please make sure to use the Q&A as the chat gets super busy. Couple other reminders that we believe are super important. One is please have fun, learn something, take something away from this session, and I'm sure you will. And then the other one is just, kind of a very important reminder, which is thank you for what you all do every single day. I'm a little biased as an activity professional myself. I believe that activities is essential for senior living, but I also want to include obviously our panelists and everyone contributing to today's session. Thank you very much for what you do every single day. So that's kind of for the quick, short introduction. Before I do get started, I want to share with Jerome and Katie and Mallory that my internet was a little flaky earlier, so I'm using my phone connection. So if anything is not coming through, please let me know and I'll turn off my camera, which should fix things. But yeah, let's get started. So, Mallory, I'm going to piggyback a little bit on one of the things that you said earlier last week, which is the way we had organized the day today. So, we started with 3 amazing, there are others, but at least 3 amazing person-directed approaches. The validation method, the work from Dr. Cameron Camp, which is all about Montessori and the field of aging, and obviously David Troxell's best friend approach. And so that was kind of the what, right? And so Mallory Grady kind of explained to us that the first session is about the what. Right now, this session is why, right? Why should we consider these approaches? And the third session is going to be more on the how, right? So thank you very much for that, Mallory. So my name again is Charles de Vilmorin. I'm the senior co-founder of Link Senior, and I'll be the moderator of today's panel. And to get us started, I'm just going to invite our esteemed panelists to introduce each other. Please feel free to take 1 to 5 minutes, and we'll go in the order of Katie and Jerome and you, Mallory. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Abbott, and I am a professor of gerontology and the executive director of the Scripps Gerontology Center at Miami University, which is located in Oxford, Ohio, if we have any Ohio folks in the house. And I'm just delighted to be here. A lot of my work over the past 20 years has been in the range of person-centered care, and specifically, how do we understand someone's preferences? So if you think about maybe sometime when you were out shopping and you found the perfect gift that you wanted to give to somebody, and how it wasn't so much about the thing that you were giving them, but that you knew them and that you knew it would bring them some joy. And so that's the kind of sentiment that we focus our research around, is how do we understand those preferences for living? How do we communicate those preferences across various individuals and shifts and departments? How do we also integrate that information into the plan of care? And then how do we wrap quality improvement around it in terms of making it sustainable? And so one of the most important things that I think we've done is to develop a valid and reliable way of assessing preferences. And I'll talk more about that later on, but it's called the Preferences for Everyday Living Inventory. And then I'll pass it on and look forward to telling you more about it down the road.
Thanks, Katie. Jérôme?
Okay, hello everyone. First, I would like to apologize for my English because I come from France, and I'll do my best to be understandable. Consider me as if I had cognitive deficits and I was struggling with my language. That's kind of the same. So thank you, Charles, for the invitation. I am currently working in France, developing Montessori for a person with dementia and staff also, working especially to build training for staff and nursing home, and trying to work with nursing home staff managers to help them change the way they work with person with dementia, and trying to bring person-centered care into that kind of crazy world we encounter, because I think it's kind of crazy. I also work a lot in developing research, trying to understand better the outcome of person-centered care, Montessori for person with dementia, and trying to find the best in all of the people involved in that. I mean, person with dementia, also staff. For example, I work with Dr. Cameron Camp in creating assessment for abilities, preferences also, and so trying to bring all these things together. Yeah, that's basically who I am, and I think I have always plenty of things to share with all of you guys.
Thank you, Jérôme. Being French, I'm a little biased, but I would say that you shouldn't apologize for being French. I think that French are awesome, but that's my personal. Thank you so much, Jérôme. Mallory, I'll let you introduce yourself. Thank you for being with us.
Jérôme will speak better than me, and he's French, so there you go. My name is Mallory DaCosta. I've been in senior living for about 22 years now, and 15 of those years has been heavily involved in the Montessori-inspired lifestyle, just like Jérôme. It has truly changed my life and all the lives of those I've worked with. And I come from the operations side, so I tend to work with companies, corporations, and in an operational capacity. Because, you know, at the end of the day, many of you probably work for businesses, and a lot of the time these ideas, you know, I would find in my own career growing up, I would attend amazing seminars and I would learn so much information. But then when I would come back to the actual workplace, I found that it seemed like everything was working against me, right? Even the foundations of what we still do today in healthcare are actually very counterproductive to a person-centered approach in many ways. So my mission has been to sort of take these ideas and these concepts and this wonderful research and make it doable, for lack of a better word, consistently with all types of staff, with all types of turnover, and with all types of challenges. So I come from really that operational side, as well as just having experienced it. having worked in activities in college and having spent essentially my entire adult life in senior living. So that's where I come from, and looking forward to today.
Thank you so much, Mallory. And again, thank you, Jerome and Katie, for being with us. I'd like to start with just a simple message to the audience, which I think that all of us obviously kind of believe that engagement works. That's kind of what we all do a little bit. But hopefully this session is going to be helpful to all of you, all of us. I'm sure all of us will learn something about continuing to build the case, right? Because most people know that engagement works one way or the other, but sometimes it could be a communication problem. It could be not knowing what to look for. It could be, Mallory, to your point about operations, a typical administrator or executive director doesn't reason the same way. They didn't get up in the morning for the same reason an activity professional does. The vision is right, but how do we get there can be different. So hopefully our conversation now is going to help us connect these dots. And if you think of these as dots, right, you could think, sometimes I like to refer to the onion, right? We have the main objective, which is quality of life of our residents. If we do that well, that's going to transcribe to clinical outcomes, right? And then the last, which is also very important, which is the financial one. So core quality of life, clinical, and then financial outcomes. So maybe we could get started just with the quality of life impact. I'll start with you, Katie, because you had a lot of work. You had a lot of work as a researcher on that. What are your thoughts initially, especially, and if you want, we can get started on your work around assessments. Would you mind sharing a couple of thoughts of what to look for when we're building the case there?
Sure. I think that, if you wanted to share that one slide that I shared with you around why preferences matter, that might be a nice visual for folks to see, because at that point, we're talking about why it matters at the individual level, why it matters at the level of the staff and the residents, so that dyad, because it's very important right now in terms of the tremendous staff turnover that the industry is experiencing. How do we make sure that the staff are also finding meaning and purpose and joy in their work that they do? And the reason why they came here was because their enjoyment of spending time with residents. And so how do we create some meaningful moments of joy in that way? And then there's also at the community level. And, there's, of course, why preferences matter in terms of making sure that folks are meeting their regulatory mandates. We know that communities that take a preference-based approach have fewer complaints and substantiated complaints. We know they have fewer deficiencies. Oh, thanks, Charles. Yeah, go to the next one where the image, keep going. There we go. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. So here you can sort of see, if at the individual, why quality of life matters right there. If preferences are known and honored, if people's choices are respected, we know they have a greater well-being, right? That's quality of life. When you have autonomy, when you feel like you belong, and when you feel like you can do things in a way that is competent. As I mentioned, that family and direct care worker goals, the first session talked about volunteers, our family members, right? We want to engage them. Family can contribute meaningful insights around the preferences of their loved ones. We know that care partners are going to be more satisfied knowing that they're providing the care that meets those individual preferences. And they also have strategies to help relieve those communications of distress. If they know that Mrs. Smith, loves to reminisce about the Apple Butter Festival, maybe giving a bath and talking about the Apple Butter Festival is a path forward there. As I was mentioning, at the provider community, if you're providing a preference-based approach, you're ensuring that your care is delivered and aligned with the resident preferences. And you're meeting, as I mentioned, you're meeting those regulatory mandates. You're going to be able to retain more staff. You're going to enhance that cultural competency of folks because the staff are going to know things about the individuals they're providing care for. You can utilize your quality assurance and performance improvement techniques around those goals. And you can also see higher resident satisfaction and family satisfaction scores. You might get more referrals and have improved workflow because you're taking and you're spending your resources where they matter most. And finally, at that societal level is equity and efficiency, right? You're ensuring that systems are in place for individuals to have their preferences included in the plan of care. That means that you're not assuming what somebody likes. You're able to ask and make sure that those preferences are incorporated. You're reducing waste and directing resources to what matters most to those individuals. So I'll stop there and let someone else talk a little bit about it.
Thank you, Katie. Jérôme, did you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, maybe I would like to share two things. First, and it will involve a story because working with Cameron Camp, he learned to me to share ideas by stories. But first, I would like to say that I think there is a huge mistake or maybe lie about dementia. The idea that responsive behaviors, agitation, apathy, depression, all of these things are generated by the, brain lesions and the disease. That is not true, actually, and there is plenty of research and literature showing this. And the thing is that I think the main outcome shouldn't be quality of life, but life, just life, and that's what's happening. So that's what I would like to bring. In many nursing homes I've worked with, we see residents totally apathetic, sleeping all day long, tied to the chairs, things like that. And people think that is normal. And that's the main issue. So it's about bringing life back and showing the main outcome is having something different than this. So let me give an example. It's about a man that was living, that was just coming in a nursing home very close to where I live in the south of France. And that man was named Serge. And Serge was having very severe cognitive impairments. His MMSE score was on 5 on 30, which indicate very severe dementia. And staff were very struggling the first day because he was very agitated, hitting everyone, trying to leave. And he was trying to destroy things in the walls, especially the button for electricity. I don't know how to say in English, but I think you get it. Okay, that button. He was trying to pull them out of the wall, and that was a nightmare. And it didn't end well the first day with an injection of antipsychotic drug. But the next day, because they had some information about who he was, it appeared that that man was an electrician, of course, and most important, he was a handyman, always in action in his entire life, always moving, doing things, fixing things, and all of these, and that is important information. So, how do you call the man that repair things in the nursing home? Technic man? There is a name for that, I guess. You see what I mean? The professional?
What does that person do, sorry?
Oh, the man who repair things in the nursing home, change light, maintenance man. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, the maintenance. Yes, the maintenance person.
That
yes.
maintenance man came to meet Serge the next day and asked him if we would agree to help him. And he did. And it appeared that Serge had a lot of preserved abilities on the motor skill, sensory skill. And he started to be part of the maintenance team. And every day he was fixing things a lot. He started also to water the plant, and he built a special table to help person in a wheelchair to water plants. So it was at the right height. What I mean is that they never had any need of injections and things like that, ever, never, ever in 3 years. He was engaged every day. He was doing things, and that is I think, the most important outcome. It's called life, and it's very different. And I think that is very important to remind that it is the outcome. The main goal is to bring life again, and that is very possible and very cost effective. I'll speak about that later, maybe. So that's what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Jérôme. That reminds me a lot of what one of our panelists in the first session, Vicky, reminded us, which is, we might want to focus on people living with quote unquote cognitive change or quote unquote dementia, but a lot of our work is just being better humans with other humans. So I do like your point about quality of life and actually reframing it more broadly as just life in general. And I think that's an amazing and great reminder. Thank you very much. So, Mallory, your experience or your nuggets on building that case beyond and into operations?
Sure. What you're talking about, Jerome, is so palpable on a visit, right? So when maybe you're in the community, or maybe a tour is in the community, or maybe a visitor, if the community has a good quality of life, you feel it, don't you? It's very noticeable. So,
Absolutely.
when making the case for why should we, right? Why should we do this? I mean, yes, it's great that they have a fun activity and that's all good and fun and games. But when you look at someone like Sarge, I used to teach my staff, would you rather he be playing with buttons and setting off fire alarms? Or would you rather that he's painting, doing touch-up paint with the maintenance director to welcome new residents into the community, right? The energy's there, the energy is going to be there, and the only way you can really work with it is to shift it. So, quality of life is wonderful, and all of us as dementia professionals want quality of life for our residents. But at the same time, when you're, think about the CEOs above us, 30,000 feet above us, they're not going to see the daily interactions. What they're going to see are the results. And nothing sells better than a building where the residents have great quality of life.
Thank you, Mallory. And on that note, Mallory, if you don't mind, going one step, you have experience with different roles, understanding what works, and then obviously trying to convey that to different levels of an organization. Do you mind sharing one step further on how these conversations occur to you and what kind of advice you would have for our audience there?
Well, this kind of goes into my next slide a little bit, but everything in life is sales, right? Negotiation, trying to get people to see things your way. Even interacting with residents, help me, I need your help. I mean, we're always trying to find out what that individual's motivation is, right? Dr. Camp earlier mentioned how he applies his methods to staff. In his trainings, we would joke, we apply these methods to all humans because these are just human methods, right? So you have to understand the motivation. I typically worked in a variety of for-profit organizations for the last 20 years. And, ultimately at the end of the day, typically, how does a company decide if they're doing well? Well, it's usually census, right? It's usually, well, the building's full. And when you're working with memory care, because it's need-based, often those communities are just full by nature of being full. But what I really had to do was say there's still a reason to improve your memory care, not just because it's full, but there's other metrics that you can look at that do translate into real dollars, So unfortunately, as unpleasant as it is to have the money conversation, sometimes that is the first step to getting people to see, like Dr. Camp said this morning, not only are we making a difference in people's lives, but it also can be a good business model. And coming at it from what motivates your audience, it might be purely quality of life, and that's amazing, but it might be the bottom line too. So kind of understanding what's going to get the person on your team and starting with that information and then bringing in all the other wonderful pieces that come with it. But I've presented to $40 billion corporations, and to try to get them to understand why this is important is difficult. Sometimes it's about the numbers first, and then the rest of it will come later.
Thanks, Mallory. Thank you for the important reminder. And I like, what you say, which is money is part of the conversation because, whether we work for nonprofits or for profits, the end goal is the same. These are organizations that need to generate revenue. And sometimes, activity professionals, I would say should try to get more credit for their work. And sometimes getting credit for our work is also just combining that conversation between quality of life, clinical, and then the financial aspect.
Well, just to piggyback off that, Charles, sorry,
Yeah.
when you bring in the activity director position, it is usually the most underpaid. But
Yeah.
the companies that I've worked for have actually changed their mindset on that, and those have become more of the higher paid positions, or the more at least respected in a lot of ways positions. But you have to show the value, right? And that's kind of our job today, is show the value of this, and it will come.
Thank you, Mallory. Yeah, well taken on the salary aspect. Obviously, we see that every day, and there's a lot of room for improvement. I think, just maybe to clarify one thing, we sometimes talk about the dichotomy, or the not necessarily conflict, but we have the clinical world, the medical model, and then the engagement world. And it is not about reducing the importance of the clinical part. That is essential, but sometimes it's about elevating the engagement aspect to have that conversation. So actually, that's a great segue to one of the questions I wanted to ask Katie, or maybe Jérôme, which is that, out there are probably gazillion type of approaches, right? There's a lot of different things you can try and get started. And I was curious to know, Katie and or Jérôme, what is a good length to start to look at a program? When somebody comes to you and say, hey, I have a great program that could benefit your resident, what would be your basic advice to say yes or no, or how to filter through, the myriad of things out there? And actually, Katie, if you want to get, I see you nodding, yeah.
Sure, thanks. I think there's a lot of talk around using evidence-based programs, right? There's also practice-based programs. And so evidence-based is the highest level, where you've had some rigorous research done with them. So for example, the work that we've done around our individualized positive psychosocial interaction, or IPI program for people living with moderate to severe dementia, has gone through a randomized controlled trial. And that's not something you're going to find with most of the projects that you find, right? Most of the programs that come your way. And so what we always recommend to folks is that you start, if it sounds like it's something that's a fit for your organization, to ask what are the measurable outcomes that you should be, you should be looking at, because you want to make sure that you can measure what you're doing. There's a joke that we say, do you measure what you treasure, or do you treasure what you measure? And many times people treasure what they measure, and that's not the way to move forward with a new initiative. You must understand what you're measuring first and move forward with that. And then I would start small, do it on a pilot scale, see if it's something that works for you, if it fits into your workflow, making sure that you do just enough so that you kind of get over that learning curve, but also enough to see its evidence for your community and your residents and staff. And so that's sort of what comes to mind initially, is sort of the first things to think about. And I'll pass it over to Jérôme.
Okay, thank you, Katie. And that sounds very familiar to me, evidence-based intervention. That's my basics, so I agree completely with what you said. What I would like to add maybe is that what we do when we have, nursing home contacting us, my company, asking to train them, help them to change, is what are your important outcomes? What is important to you? And let's try to think about it. But I have to say, since the COVID pandemic, something happened. I don't know if it's true in the United States, but in France, it's like a nightmare now. And nursing home in France are facing a huge, huge crisis. All staff are leaving. I mean, it is crazy. It's a huge issue. Yeah, I have no words to say it. I know nursing home, they have no more nurses. I don't know if you can imagine what it means. It's crazy. So what we found now is that the main issue and most important outcome is, would these approaches, whatever the name, person-centered care, help us to keep staff and to engage staff, but to keep them first. And there is a huge amount of data about that. Charles, would you agree to share the second slide I sent you? Because I would like to share this with all the people here. And it's kind of related to what Dr. Kemp said in the first session and what Mallory said. I'm a psychologist and I've learned that from the next one, but this one is important too, but maybe the next one, Charles? Okay. Cameron Kemp learned to me, it is not enough to be right, you have to be efficient. And you have to understand to speak the language of the administrator, the people who sign the check, and so on. But all of these things comes from research with high level of evidence. What brings person-centered care principles, whatever the approach, it's globally person-centered care principles. What does it bring? It brings better work conditions. People work in places with person-centered care and it says they like to go to work. That is a huge difference. They feel more connected together and they have, and that has been said, this feeling of accomplishment. They are doing what they want to do. The reason why they are here is now real. We just led a research very recently, and what we found is that person-centered care in nursing home in France is associated to a better organizational climate. People feel better, everyone, staff, managers, families, residents, and you have a reduction in burnout, in workload, stress. All of these things are important, and most important, reduction in turnover. So that is, for me, I wanted to push on that because I think that is for now, for us in France, the most important outcome. And maybe most important, we have data, and maybe Mallory will say something about that, showing that it's cost effective. So many times people say, okay, that is nice, and keeping staff is important, but we do not have the money. But actually, it's like Cameron said, it's a good business model. So I will conclude with one sentence about that. What I discover with person-centered care, I'm like Mallory, you know, I'm in mission for the last 20 years, clearly mission of my life. We can have everything, better outcome for everyone. So I think that is what we have to push right now. It's time, and I think that's the answer to the crisis we are facing right now.
Thank you, Jerome. Mallory, you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, do you want to put up my slide? Is it time yet or is it too soon? I've lost track of the.
Oh, it's whenever
organic.
It's
organic.
Yes.
So yeah, on this topic of, the slide that Jerome briefly had up was about a lot of really exciting outcomes that Dr. Camp, actually, I don't know if Jerome's going to talk about it, but I'm sure he will. That was sort of the inspiration behind kind of my own little study. And what Katie was saying is so important about gathering some information. I mean, you guys can do this on your own. I mean, this is how I was able to bring the Montessori approach to the lap of some pretty powerful decision makers in the industry, was because I just did my own data as much as I could, right? It's certainly not official and it's certainly not perfect, but there's no reason that you can't look at outcomes in your own communities and see the difference in the benefits. And what Katie said about measuring what you treasure, treasuring what you measure is amazing. And especially if you think about the audience you're looking at, right? So what you may treasure may be different than what your boss or your administrator or your CEO may treasure. So here is a very, very brief bit of data that was collected recently. And this is sort of an ongoing project. But, back to that conversation of a full building is not necessarily a successful building. And that is really hard when you're dealing with need-based care to get through to people sometimes. So what this data represents, just 12 to 15, I believe, communities looked at. Some had a very high adoption of the Montessori approach, and others did not. And this is just the Montessori approach as their method. So one of the most important figures here is the $110 higher monthly RevPOR. And this is just over, again, a short period. But if you think about that, that means that a full building could still actually be less valuable in the consumer's eyes, right? So a full building is not able to charge as much, to put that in lay terms, as a building that has a really quality program. So if you think about a community that has 40 to 50 residents, that's an extra $5,000 to $6,000 a month. That justifies most people's entire activity department right there. So thinking about just actually being able to charge more for the product can actually be beneficial data for someone. I'm sorry, RevPOR means revenue per occupied room. I apologize. I forget sometimes that I'm not talking to finance people all day, every day. So RevPOR means how much money you can charge for that monthly rent. And I know that that data was really impressive to a lot of, higher ups that I had spoken with, is that, you can have it full, or you can actually show value, and that you're going to have more people interested in that product. The communities, just in like that 3 to 4 month period, I believe it was, I think it's actually up to 6 months now, 7 to 10% higher occupancy. So that means a lot in a big company. When you're talking about having multiple buildings, if you can stay 10% occupied higher than your competitors, this is where it gets really interesting, $40,000 higher NOI, net operating income, per month. So that means that your expenses in a Montessori approach are actually far lower. And I get this question all the time. Well, your activity program is pretty amazing. I bet it's really expensive. I bet you have to hire all these people. It's actually the opposite. This program, because it's so environmentally based, it's in the core of the daily culture. And you will actually see a huge reduction in your staffing and your labor costs, because we're not relying on that one-on-one, for lack of a better word, babysitting model, right? Where you just have to sort of spend time with people one-on-one, which is very expensive and inefficient. So, that was what was interesting to me, is they're actually making more money at the end of the month, likely because their expenses are lower. Montessori also doesn't require a lot of stuff. You don't really have to buy things. It's just the procedures and the jobs and the social roles. 32% more move-ins in a 3 to 4 month period. So just in that short period of time that we were watching these communities, they had a 32% higher move-in rate. And then lastly, 79% higher tour to move-in conversion. So that means that once the people were in the community, 79% more likely to move in because of how it felt and how it presented. And we assume that it, appeared to be a better product. So these are just some ideas. Again, they were taken in similar markets with similar products. It's not a perfect study by any means, but this is an example of some of the stuff you may want to look at. You may have, even just in your community, a wing that you do Montessori or person-based care in, and then a wing that maybe doesn't have it as much. Maybe you can compare the outcomes there, right? Something to get people to take notice that it's actually working. NOI is net operating income. Sorry. So that means the money that you make at the end of the month, that is profit, right? That's the profit from the business for that month, which is a very important number to your bosses and the CEOs. There was a 40K higher NOI. So they made that much more profit in similar markets and similar communities. So again, this is stuff that over the years, I just have had to kind of collect, and when Dr. Camp's group came out with some of their data, it was really helpful, but show the people that this is more than just a fluffy, nice idea. This is legitimately going to not only improve their quality of life, but improve their business operation.
Thank you so much, Mallory. Just a couple of thoughts. Well, I think we could all have thousands of thoughts about this, but just a couple of thoughts that I think is very valuable. Especially for our audience is, please take the time to maybe think about these items that Mallory is suggesting, right? These are the items that might be important to your quote-unquote decision makers within the organization. So Mallory, thank you very much for sharing more details about what they are, each of them. What I really enjoy about this discussion so far is that the point here, like Jérôme and Katie and actually Mallory mentioned, is that a person-centered approach doesn't need to be very expensive, but what tends to be effective is when it is evidence-based, then it helps us have it as part of our culture. And that was Mallory's point about, when you enter the building, I always talk about the vibe, and it's true, you have locations or communities that just feel different. And to Jérôme's point, these evidence-based approach have also a profound impact on staffing, and staff are happier, they stay longer, there's less turnover, and that helps build a simply better community. So thank you for kind of helping us combine these aspects. Getting back to one aspect that we discussed as we were preparing is connecting the dots. Mallory, you shared these examples. I'm curious to hear from you, Mallory, if you have any advice. There are administrators and executive directors, like maybe the other way around. Do you have kind of advice for the C-levels on what to look for in activities and engagement?
There's some other key things. And again, this is very anecdotal. This is things that you feel when you walk in the community, but they'll always talk about these great thriving buildings that are doing so great, right? Everybody hears about the golden child or this great community. And I always ask them, you don't ever have a great community with a terrible activity program, right? I always kind of bring them back to that. It's like, you've never seen that. You've never seen this amazing, thriving, successful building that everyone loves, and they have a terrible activity program. So I really just try to remind them that the two differentiators we really have in this industry is food and activities, right? Those are the two things everybody always says, those are the two things that can really set you apart. And why not be the best? Why not be the best option in that respect? So I think driving them to this idea that, do you want to set yourself apart as a competitor? Yes, your census might be there, but is everything else there? Do you feel it when you walk in the building? Do you have that sense of this is a really successful building? And maybe let's consider that the lifestyle program and the culture there might be part of that.
Thank you, Mallory. I like to sometimes say that all of us do some form of engagement, right? Even if you don't want to, you're doing some form of engagement. So sometimes the question is, how well do you want to, how good you want to be at it, or how much do you want to do it?
There's one thing, Charles,
yeah,
I was just gonna,
please,
I was just gonna piggyback on, when you're trying to talk to the C-suite, I think for them, what I would say is that our research has found statistically significant differences. So organizations that take a preference-based approach and integrate those preferences into the plan of care, they have fewer complaints, total complaints, and fewer substantiated complaints. Those are real dollars that you have to spend with surveyors and regulators. And then the other thing is that the folks that take a preference-based approach, they were more likely to have 4 or 5-star ratings on their deficiencies. So your health inspections, so the higher scores are better, and lower deficiencies scores. They were more likely to be deficiency-free. And so there are many reasons that you can see this information coming through that affects your bottom line. And then, of course, if you are providing an environment that empowers your staff to spend meaningful uses of their time with people in ways they know they're not feeling moral injury towards doing it, you're going to retain your staff. So again, this approach can have real value dollar-wise.
Just to think, exactly. I'm sorry, just to add to what Katie's saying. Some of the preliminary data too coming out that isn't ready yet, but what it's trending is less staff, like I said, less staff needed to run a person-centered based program. And we're seeing a much better turnover for staffing ratio or turnover rates, because the staff are there for the residents. They're there to make a difference. They're not there for the paycheck. We know this. Well, most of them are. We have a few probably, but for the most part, people are there because of the residents. And if they're truly making a difference in their lives, like Katie's saying, and they're actually seeing that benefit, they're going to stay longer. The other thing we're seeing trend is a longer length of stay of your residents. So I don't know if that necessarily means they're living longer, but it does mean that their length of stay is increased. And if you think about the cost of a move-in and how much staffing and everything, if you can increase their length of stay even by 6 months because they're happier and healthier, those are all things that really do impact the bottom line.
Yeah, Mallory, sorry, there's just so many things I just want to bounce off. The one thing I would say is that sometimes it's just adding life to their years, right? That kind of summarizes a little bit what you were saying here, which is, yeah, it could probably extend life, which is great, but it also just makes it meaningful. And, I think going back to what the three were saying here is that our team members, well, sorry, let me back up. We are just very, very fortunate to be in an industry that carries so much purpose. I feel blessed every day for the work that I do. And I'm sure that most of our team members, they kind of feel the same. And it's an opportunity to serve elders. And so many of them obviously want to do more of that. So, going back to Jérôme's slide, when we have these systematic cultural projects and ways to achieve things, obviously it just helps staff be successful what they love to do, which is to make residents successful. Part of the conversation I was hoping to gear towards was a question we have about family members. So, maybe if Jérôme or you, Katie, want to piggyback on that because you kind of extensively discussed it a little bit. How do you achieve that? Like, how do you include family members as part of these strategies?
Jérôme, you want to go first? Then I'll go.
Go, please.
Okay. So the things that we encourage around family members, and our research has found too, is that, so let's take the case of somebody who moves into your community and maybe is not communicative, is not able to express their preferences to you. Where do you begin? And this is one way to engage family, is to understand, is have them talk to you about what they liked to do and what some of their preferences were. And many times family are saying, well, they used to garden, but they can't do that anymore. Well, all of you in this Zoom know how to do a strengths-based approach and modify an activity. So sometimes it's simply just saying, let me, the professional, figure that out. Just give me some information that I can use to engage with the person, right? And what we know from our research is that we're social beings. Any engagement is better than no engagement. But what we also know is that if you take a preference-based approach, you get an additional impact for that individual. They have better outcomes if you are engaging them around a topic of their preference. They're more likely to engage with you. That's what we call the mechanism around engagement. And so the family can be critical points in terms of helping you understand. Now, some people will say, well, I don't know. And so again, it's just, trying your best. And then if there's not a family member involved, it's then asking your staff and training your staff to observe. What are times when the individual is smiling when you're doing something? What are times when they're actively tracking what's going on? Those can be identified as preferred activities or preferred topics of conversation. And that's where all the folks that you're training and working with, their skills. I hate it when people refer to this as an unskilled labor task. This is so highly skilled. And so recognizing that emotion, Vicki mentioned that in the first session, learning how to recognize the emotions of the people that you're providing care to can be a window into their preferences when they're no longer able to communicate them. Jérôme, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Katie. I remember once I was working with the nursing home with the staff, trying to learn Montessori approach, how to engage residents. And at first they were saying, no, our residents are too challenging. After one day of training, they said, okay, we understand now that the residents are not the challenge, but families are so challenging. They are the worst challenge. That was funny. The reason I say that is that I think exactly the same approach can be used with families because they are human too. And so we were speaking about engaging residents, engaging staff, but it's about the same. So I agree with Katie that giving some tips and maybe small training, that's what we do in France. Usually we give conference, group conference for families, or small training for families, how to engage not only my relative with dementia, but other people. And then I would suggest to the nursing home, the residents, ask family, would you like to share things with us? Maybe you have patience, maybe you have interest, and would you like to volunteer and come to share times with us as a member of the community? And so when we do that, and I have plenty of examples in my mind, we see a huge drop out of complaints because they feel included and engaged. And so, for example, yeah, the son of a resident, it was the challenge, the challenging son, always complaining, observing everything. And after 6 months, he was leading a poetry club into the residence with persons with dementia, helping them to write poems, sharing them. They created a book. And I have to tell you, no more complaints. He was part of the family, if I may say. And so I think that is something very important, to include them, not only because we fear them trying to control them, as we try to control residents, but to really include and engage families as member of the community that have abilities, things to bring, and that's what they need, I guess, I think.
Mallory, did you want to say something here?
Yeah, with the families element, definitely the education, and definitely, like Jerome said, get the buy-in. But I have my other thought is actually pertinent to what somebody just put in the chat. Sometimes, administration isn't on the same page as you. And I find that, when you have a family member who's difficult and wants to know why, mom got a temporary tattoo, or why mom is being allowed to sweep the floor, or why my mother's doing that, education and such goes only so far as how the organization presents it. You have to be a united front, and your whole community, all of your administration has to have a unified point of view that's research-based. You are the experts in senior living. So I think in my experience, how I got around a lot of that was by simply avoiding it, by having my whole team unified in what we do here and making sure everyone understands that. The second piece of that is I really think people at your community level, whether it be caregivers or mid-level management, need to understand what a power of attorney actually does. Unless a resident has a true guardianship situation, I think a lot of the times we let families make rules and dictate things that they really don't have the right to do. And sometimes it's about a loving conversation about boundaries and about, what that person wants, and advocating for what the individual wants. I had an example. The resident would go up every day after lunch, get the broom and sweep on her own. And in our culture, at our communities in Montessori based, we encourage that. We don't stop them. And every time the daughter, why is she doing that? I am not going to remove her rights to do that. That's not, we don't get to do that, right? We don't get to take that person's right away just because you have power of attorney. That doesn't give you, lordship over their whole lives. So it's a delicate conversation, and, please don't go tell your families that tomorrow, but definitely as a community, you need to understand what they are allowed to require. There is a limit to that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the important reminder. Go ahead, Joel. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Very quickly add one thing to what Mallory said. Many times in such examples, this can be avoided, the complaints of the family, by setting a very clear frame when the person enters into the facility. Family complains for very good reason. If you sell them a very nice home and it's a prison or hospital or hotel, they will complain. So if you explain how things are going, I have in mind a place they said, we do not tie people to the chair here. Never. That's very clear. It's in the frame of the community. And one son was saying, I want my father in your nursing home because it's an excellent one, but I want you to tie him to the chair because he's at fall risk. And they said, no, that's not what we do here. And the father never enter in the nursing home. So I think putting the things very clear, what is possible here, what is not, how things will happen, and saying the truth is a good start. And then it's very easy to have that kind of conversation Mallory was talking about.
Thank you so much, Jérôme. You know, Jérôme, you just, I really like what you said about the website, because one of my personal pet peeves is the difference sometimes on what's on the website, like the promise, like the marketing promise to our residents and family members, and what actually happens in the community. And sometimes it works, sometimes there's a disconnect. But, you know, getting back to what Mallory was saying, like, we are the experts, right? Like, we are the true experts. And piggybacking to what Katie was saying, you know, when we think, if we think of our, which is not unskilled, but if our workforce is quote unquote unskilled, like, it is our duty to actually elevate and educate them and give them the tools. So I think these were kind of amazing, either amazing reminders, or for me sometimes like just learning opportunities. So thank you very much, Mallory and Jérôme and Katie today. I know we had about 5 minutes left and we could definitely go on and so on, but I'd love to hear quickly from the three of you, you know, knowing that today we have over 700 professionals, maybe they all work at different communities or in corporate roles, but if you do the math, they're probably touching the lives of 50,000 residents or more, right? So that's a great impact. Tell them a little bit, like, what excites you today, right now, something that you're seeing that you think is cool, in maybe, you know, 1 or 2 sentences, and we'll try to wrap up from there. And to start, we can start with Jérôme, because your microphone is on.
I first would like to hear the ladies, if it's okay.
Okay. That's okay. Katie, you want to jump in?
Oh my gosh, sure. So I have to just tell you what really is exciting me right now is that we have funding from the National Institutes of Aging, and we're actually running what's called an embedded pragmatic clinical trial on our IPI intervention. And folks are doing it. They're telling us that it's working, that the residents living with moderate to severe dementia are seeing fewer incidences of, you know, distressful communication or behaviors. The staff are happier. Their administrators are coming and doing IPIs with residents and feeling joy. That it's not adding cost. They're able to, you know, include it into the workflow they already have. And we're just delighted that is running, and we're hopeful for some positive outcomes. I'll turn it over to Mallory.
Congratulations, Katie. Mallory, you want to go?
Yeah, I think I'm excited that I'm seeing the market and the requirements of our consumers change. I think our families are getting a lot more informed. Like Dr. Camp said, the market will demand it. I'm already seeing that. I'm seeing that in, you know, communities that are truly taking the time to improve their products are getting the results. And I do think families are starting to understand that it's more than just a pretty building. It's about what they feel in the daily life of the resident. And that's nice to see. Like I said, I've been in the business for 20 or so years, and, you know, 10 years ago, even, it was about the building, and that's all the families could see and look at. And I'm really starting to see a shift in the consumer mentality, which is refreshing.
Thank you, Mallory. And I agree with you. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of people working on the memory care program right now. So, Jérôme?
That's kind of what I wanted to say. I've heard before, is the future, but I think it's not the future. I think in some way it's the present. I mean, the data are here for many, many years, many datas. And of course, there is a huge challenges in the system, and it's not perfect, and it's not about saying everything is fine, but it already exists. What Mallory shared, what Katie just shared, all of these people here, and what you said, Charles, about all the people that are connected to this moment, it's amazing. So it's the present, it's here. There is a lot to do, but in Montessori approach, we always build on abilities and capacities. And I would like to finish by saying what amazed me right now and excites me is just to see all the abilities and the capacities of the system. And we have to build on this. That's my word.
Thank you, Zero. I absolutely love what you're saying. Like one of my favorite quotes says, like the future is already here. It's not evenly distributed. And I think that the three of you did a great job of kind of summarizing what that future present, or like the why, like Mallory was saying, and advocating and explaining it. So thank you so much. Again, Mallory, Jerome, and Katie, that was an amazing conversation. To the audience, please feel free to be in touch with our panelists. I'm sure that they will all, I've seen them all share their emails. They would love to help you out, to help our industry continue to improve. And thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I learned a lot. I hope you did as well.